Hello everyone, welcome back to my in minutes where we go over tips, tricks, and tools that you can do in Autodesk Maya. I know I said in a couple of videos ago that I was going to combine the disk and the plane together, but I decided to separate them after recording a video just because I feel that there's a lot more um, depth to the creation of the disk that can be explained more efficiently in a separate video than if it was tagged on to the end of the plane video. So let's go ahead and create a disk. Again, there are a couple different ways you can do it. You can go up to your poly modeling shelf, click on this circle icon here to create a disk. You can also go up to create polygon primitives disk. You can also hold shift and right click to pick whip over to your disk option. I'm going to go ahead and hit the gray square to the right of the disk to bring up the option box, and then I'm going to hit apply to create one. And let's go ahead and focus in on it. Now, one thing to note about creation of a disk is because it is using polygons, it is never going to be a completely clean, efficient circle. It's always going to be have some sort of edge definition to it. It'll try and divide it up as smooth as possible to look or approximate a circle. But when you are creating objects like this in 3D space with polygons, it's always going to have a little bit of edge geometry with it. Same thing with the sphere. There's a great sphere here. Again, it's not going to be a completely smooth sphere. It is going to have a little bit of geometry to it. In rendering, when it's kind of far away, you can't really tell too much about it. When you get close, that's when you can start seeing, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of edge definition here. But you can also further hide this by turning on smooth shading to even further hide the edges that you have on the object. But again, let's go back to a disk, and yeah, here I just turn on my smooth shading to, again, just keep trying to hide out the edge definition that is along these sides here. But if you zoom in, you can kind of start to see, yeah, there's still a little bit of that edge going along it. All right, so let's go ahead and go through the options. The first options that we have are the sides options. Now the size just determines how many edges we have or how many sections that this disk is divided in initially. If I add in a second side or a fourth or another side here to 4, you can see that there's 4 distinct sections here along the disk. If I go down to 2 sides, actually I can't go down to 2 sides here. It always has to start with 3 because, again, polygons, the most simple polygon that you can work with is 3. I went to 5 sides here. You can see there's 5 distinct sections here, and at the center here we have this little star shape that distinguishes that. We go to 6. We have 6 sections here, and so on and so forth. I can continuously iterate this as far as I want to. We'll just stay with 3 for now. The second option that we have is the subdivision mode. I'm going to go ahead and actually explain what these subdivisions are before I go to the subdivision mode. Now, subdivisions determine how many polygons are, or how many polygons have been divided up from that initial distribution mode that we have with our size and our subdivision mode. I can bring this down all the way to 0 and have it just be one option here. Here you can see we have one polygon that has 3 sides and it hasn't been divided up anyway. If I add in more sides here, I can continue adding sides to this polygon, but it's not going to be divided up anywhere. If I add in one bit of divisions onto one subdivision, it's going to divide that polygon up one time into sections here and then arrange them in a way that makes them into a circle. And this is where the subdivision mode actually comes into account here. Because I have this set to circle, and by default, when you create a disk, it is going to be set to circle. It's going to try and arrange those polygons in a way that makes it approximate a circle. If it was to change to something like quads here, you can see that it's still going to be a triangle because it is a 3-sided object here, but it'll divide them into the most efficient quad shape that we can here by adding in divisions on the sides here. If I change to triangles here, it's going to divide it into 4 shapes here, just because it's going to try and just create or keep all the triangles the same in one geometry type. Changes to something like pi. What pi does is that it will add in divisions so that everything kind of goes down to this original center point here, and keep everything along one. We'll have everything divide up to one center point here, and then add in different amounts of geometry so that you always have this one center piece here. And it isn't necessarily going to equally divide them here, so you'll try to most efficiently work with it. If we go to caps here, caps tries to create a definition where you'll have a little bit of a top end piece here, a little cap that can work with it. If I was to move these edges or vertices along here, I can change, and I go back and add in more divisions here. It's going to try and keep that cap on. If I change this to something like pi, it's not going to necessarily keep a flat end piece at the center here. But again, when you create a disk, by default, it's going to keep its subdivision mode as a circle. Hold on. And try to divide it up as equally as you can on a circle. So yeah, again, you can see as you start to play around with the different amounts of subdivisions and sides, and then change the type of subdivision mode that we have to work with, you can see how each one is calculating or dividing up the object into different types of geometry as efficiently as we can with different types of calculations. Again, with quads, it's going to try and keep them all as quadrilateral shapes here. If I change this to something like triangles, it'll try to keep the divisions up to as many efficient triangles as possible. If I change it to pi, it'll try and just divide up everything into equal shape as possible. So you can see here, all of these shapes are about the equal size. If I change it to caps here, it's going to try and make sure that everything has a little bit of uniform divisions to it. If I add in more subdivisions, it'll just keep those uniform shapes in mind. If I add in more sides here, it'll keep that uniform. If I add in pi here, all of those shapes you can kind of see are all roughly the same size and shape. Sometimes you're going to have to, as you go into up to higher subdivision modes, it's going to get less and less similar here, but all of these shapes are generally the same area length. And then if I hit it on circle, it'll arrange them in a way that best approximates a circle. Now again, these subdivision modes, you can theoretically go to infinite amounts. The minimal slider limit that you have here is for your subdivisions is going to be 6. Here you can actually go quite above 6 here, but the reason you don't want to go beyond 6 is just for efficiency purposes. So I'm going to go ahead and actually delete this object here and create another polygon disk with 6 subdivisions. As you see, it created it pretty efficiently. If I go ahead and change this to 7 and hit apply, you can see that it took a little bit longer to create, maybe just like a second or so. Again, at some of the lower subdivision levels, it's not going to be as apparent there. But if I was to go up to, let's say, 8 subdivisions and delete this object and hit apply, you can see mine is taking actually a lot longer time to kind of calculate out that creation of the object here. What is important to note is that when you are doing this, Maya itself isn't crashing or freezing. It's just taking a long time to calculate that many polygons in a condensed space there. As you can see from my heads-up display, we're already kind of entering a world where we have a lot of different polygon information. If I go back down to 7, or if I go back down to 6 and delete this, hit apply, you can see I only have polygons around the thousands area here. Whereas if I went back to my older shape here, we're in polygons beyond the 10,000s range, closely and quickly going into our 100,000s range. If I go ahead and add in like something like 10 subdivisions and hit apply, you can see that the disk has actually been created here in the outliner, but it's taking a very, very long time to kind of calculate and create the object here in the 3D viewport. I can't really click anything else here in Maya. As you see, I'm moving my cursor around and nothing's really changing. That's just because it's taking a very long time to calculate that information. So generally you want to keep your subdivisions to a fairly low amount. You don't usually want to go beyond something like 7 or 8. Once you go beyond that, then you're starting to get into calculations that will make Maya really, really inefficient and then kind of freeze up like this. Again, it's not necessarily crashing. It's not necessarily breaking itself. It's just taking a very, very long time to work, and you're not really going to be losing a lot of time when you're working with Maya. I'm going to go ahead and pause the recording here until we create the object, and then we'll go ahead and explain the rest of the options. We're back, everyone. Don't think you'll be able to see this on the video itself, but it took like 10 minutes to calculate the creation of this disk here. As you can see, it's really dense with polygons here. We have around 786,000 polygons in this mesh, which is just like far too much for something like this. If I go back to my Polydisk editor and I change my subdivision level to something like 2, you see this is probably just a lot more efficient, and we can approximate the edges a lot easier with using something like smooth shade. So usually don't really need something that dense of a mesh, but it is possible to work with it. And the last option that we have, of course, is our radius option. The radius option changes the radial length of the object, by default set to 1. So 1 point from the center is going to go all the way out to 1 unit here. It changes to something like 4. Now it's 4 units long from the center to 4 units long from the center to wherever point that we have. And then we have our height baseline as well, which changes where you have it aligned in your world. All right, so that's all the options that you have when it comes to creating a polygon disk. In the next video, we'll start going on to some of the more complex polygons that you can create. Until next time, though, see ya.